let's talk about a bias that affects billions of people. It quietly influences who we hire, who we vote for, and even who we fall in love with. It's a prejudice so deeply wired into our brains that most of the time, we don't even see it. Today, we're digging into the surprising and frankly kind of weird science of Heightism.
So, let me just ask you something straight up. Do you want to be rich? To be a powerful, successful leader? To have people literally and, figuratively look up to you?
Well, a whole mountain of scientific evidence points to one almost ridiculously simple solution. Just be tall. I know, it sounds crazy, but it's true. This one physical trait has a huge impact on our lives, and it's all because of a bias that's thousands of years old. To really get why, we've got to rewind way back to when our ancestors were out there on the plains. See, in that world, height meant strength. A taller person could protect the tribe, they could spot danger from further away, and they were, let's be honest, way more intimidating in a fight. Our brains are still running on that ancient operating system. And this brings us to the official term heightism. It's a prejudice against people simply based on how tall or short they are. And this isn't just some subtle, fuzzy feeling. It actively changes how we see the world and the people in it. And here's where it gets really wild. This bias is so powerful, it can literally change what our eyes see. There's a classic experiment that shows exactly how this works. So picture this. It's 1968. A researcher named Paul Wilson takes the exact same man to 3 different university classes. In the first class, he's introduced as just a student. In the second, he's a lecturer. And in the final class, he's presented as a very prestigious doctor from Cambridge University. After the man left each room, Wilson asked all the students the same simple question. How tall was he? The results were just astonishing. The students who thought he was this high-status doctor actually saw him as being a full 5 centimeters. That's about 2 inches taller than the students who thought he was just one of them. Same guy, same actual height. The only thing that changed was his status, and that changed how tall people thought he was. It's like our brains have this built-in formula. Status equals height. When we see someone important, our mind just automatically stretches them out a bit. We have this subconscious belief that a person with authority, well, they just can't be short. Now, this isn't just some quirky psychological experiment to talk about at parties. This bias has very real and often very high costs in our jobs, in our politics, and yeah, even in our love lives. Take the corporate world, for instance. If you look at the height of an average person versus the average CEO of a major company, you see a pretty dramatic difference. And believe me, that gap is no accident. In fact, get this. A staggering 90% of CEOs at Fortune 500 companies are taller than the average person. We unconsciously connect height with leadership, with competence, and that gives taller people this invisible boost all the way up the corporate ladder. The exact same thing happens in politics. In the last 100 years of U.S. presidential elections, not a single winning candidate has been shorter than the average American. And if you look at the last 27 elections, the shorter candidate has won only 3 times. It seems voters, just like boardrooms, prefer the taller option. And this bias literally pays off. An Australian study figured out that for every 5 centimeters of height, that's about 2 inches, again, a person earns, on average, an extra $950 a year. Over a whole career, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, all for a few inches of bone. And it doesn't stop with money or power. When we get to romance, the bias is even more intense. In one study, 81 women were asked if they'd be in a relationship with a man who was shorter than them. Only 2 said yes. 2! This preference for taller partners shows up across all sorts of cultures, even in remote indigenous tribes. Okay, so the case seems pretty much closed, doesn't it? Being tall is basically a life hack. It's a superpower that gets you money, power, and success, right? Well, not so fast. It turns out there's a whole other side to this story. The view from the top isn't always as rosy as it seems. Being tall actually comes with its own very unique set of problems and costs.
So, yeah, taller people might get the perks like being seen as powerful and having higher status, but they also pay a price for it. A very real one, involving more expenses, serious health risks, and maybe even a shorter life. Let's just break it down. Taller bodies need more fuel, right? About 10% more food for every 7 centimeters of height. They have more cells, which statistically just increases the risk of some cancers. The heart has to pump harder to get blood all the way up and down a bigger frame. And taller people are way more likely to have back and joint problems. And, of course, they have to put up with the endless, how's the weather up there jokes. But this is the really surprising part. It might even affect lifespan. A study in Finland found that shorter skiers lived, on average, 7 years longer than taller basketball players. In Japan, people who live to be 100 years old are, on average, about 10 centimeters shorter than those who live to 75. It seems like being a bit more compact might actually be better for long-term survival. So this all leads us to the really big question. We've seen just how powerful this ancient bias is, but in our modern world, is height really a good measure of what a person is capable of what they're worth? The answer is, of course, absolutely not. It's an evolutionary hangover. It's a glitch in our social programming that just doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, come on. History is packed with shorter people who achieved incredible things. We're talking military geniuses like Napoleon, world leaders like Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel, and legendary athletes like Roberto Carlos and Nate Robinson who completely dominated their sports. Ultimately, what it all boils down to is this. Our obsession with height is just an echo from a world that's long gone. We're judging people today using criteria that was meant for hunting mammoths, not for writing code or running a country or creating beautiful art. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If our perception of something as basic as height is so easily twisted by these ancient instincts, what other invisible biases might be shaping your decisions every single day? That's something to chew on. Thanks for tuning in.